It's pretty tough.
I know.
They do them in the middle of the workday.
Huh?
They do it in the middle of the workday.
No, they usually do them from 5.
It's pretty tough for me to get away.
I know.
But I meet with Brian personally a lot. So
Brian's done a lot.
yeah, we're working together. We're working.
Dick Lampin and I are heading a committee. Former award winner. You know, the National Human Relations Award that brought in 800 people. The last 20 out of 23 have not been Jewish.
Yeah, it's
That
amazing.
says a lot.
For sure. All right, we're going to get started.
Okay.
Good Shabbos. How we doing? Here we go. All right. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Beini uvein v'nei Yisrael Oti le'olam v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Uvayom ha'shvi Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei b'riah gafen Amen L'chaim. Forgot. Okay. Torah study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay. Torah portion is Shalach Lecha. My favorite portion, my bar mitzvah portion, from June 11th, 1988, I think, was my bar mitzvah. This is a famous Torah portion, the Torah portion of the spies. If we were in the first two parts of the Torah portion, we could read some really interesting stories about the story of the spies and how they spied out the land, but it's the third triennial cycle, so we just have some sacrifices and seemingly less interesting portions. We're not going to get so much into the tzitzit, but we could. But I want to focus on something else. So the question is, when you're reading through the Torah, and you have a narrative, and then you have laws, are those laws always connected to the narrative, or is it just sort of thrown together that, now would be a good time to talk about the fringes on your garments since we just talked about the spies? Or now would be a good time to talk about sacrifices and how you use wine and bread in the sacrifices? it's sort of a random section of stuff that we're about to see that's put in after the spies. And so we ask the question, is this section connected to the narrative of the story or not? And what exactly was the sin of the spies? So the first sin, which we had, was the golden calf. And we talked about how either last week or the week before, the ringleaders of the golden calf were the mixed multitude, the Eruv Rav, who convinced everyone else, except for the Levites and the women, to help build the golden calf, and then they did. And then they were still going to go to Israel, though. Even though they sinned with the golden calf, they were still going to go to Israel. And God said, I could understand you sinning against me. I could take that. But now with the sin of the spies, you've sinned against the land of Israel. And that I can't forgive. So you're not going to get, because you don't want to go to Israel, when the spies come back and give their report. By the way, the spies come back and give a wonderful report. The land's fabulous. Everything's great about the land. The problem is there's people there that look scary and we don't think we can destroy them. And because we can't destroy them, we don't want to go there. And, we could have gone back to Egypt and had garlic with our leeks and cucumbers. And it's hard to find like a good garlic aioli, in Israel. So we don't want to go. Okay, fine, you won't go. You'll wander for 40 years and you'll die, and the next generation will go. And so that's the sin of the spies. 2 of the spies were good, Caleb and Joshua, came back and said, yeah, it's scary there, but we'll be fine. We can do it. And the other 10 spies said, no, we're not going to be able to do it. Okay, so we have that whole story. And when that story ends and we learn about the sin of the spies, then we have the section that we're going to read now. And so the question that I ask is the section that we're going to read now connected to the sin of the spies? Or is it just something that we needed to know also, and here it comes? Okay, now one of the things that you see is, if you're a Jew living in that time, and God tells you, you're going to die in the wilderness, and you're not going to go to the land of Israel. So you ask yourself, well, do I still need to follow the mitzvahs? Do I still need to keep kosher? I mean, wasn't the whole point of this that, we were going to get to go to the land of Israel and inherit the land? And now you're telling me I'm not going to get to inherit the land, and I'm going to be wandering my whole life. Do I still need to keep Shabbat? Or can I text on Shabbat? Yeah. Or like I said, that's why I don't use the board. I don't like to write on Shabbat because I prefer to text. All right. So, but does it even matter? I mean, and so then you have that story of the guy who collects wood, and he dies. They kill him. And the reason why he did that was to show everyone else that the mitzvahs still matter. He sacrificed himself, because if everyone went out and collected wood, they all would have been killed. That would have been the end of the Jewish experiment right there. So he sacrificed himself to say, even though we're not going to the land of Israel, you still have to follow these mitzvahs, which is how we know here in Miami that you still have to follow the mitzvahs even though we're not in the land of Israel right now. The mitzvahs are for everywhere. Are there some mitzvahs that are only for the land, agricultural, sacrificial? Of course. But the rest of them are the ones that aren't dependent on the land, go everywhere, right? So it's like, if you fly to Israel with your parents and you say, we're now leaving Israeli airspace, I don't have to honor you anymore, right? You can't do that. You can't do that. All right, so let's get into it. We're going to start chapter 15, verse 1. Numbers chapter 15, verse 1. If anyone has the page, if you could. 11:19. How about that? All right. So Numbers 15, Norman, verse 1. Here we go.
The Eternal One spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I'm giving you to settle in, and would present an offering by fire to the Eternal from the herd or from the flock, be it burnt offering or sacrifice, in fulfillment of a vow explicitly uttered, or as a free will offering, or at your fixed occasions, producing an odor pleasing to the Eternal. The person
Sounds good.
The person who presents the offering to the Eternal shall bring as a meal offering a tenth of a measure of choice flour with a quarter of a hin of oil mixed in. You shall also offer, with the burnt offering of the sacrifice, a quarter of the hin of wine as a libation for each sheep. In the case of a ram, you shall present as a meal offering 2/10 of a measure of choice flour with a third of a hin of oil mixed in, and a third of a hin of wine as a libation, as an offering of pleasing odor to the Eternal. And if it is an animal from the herd that you offer to the Eternal as a burnt offering or as a sacrifice, in fulfillment of a vow explicitly uttered or as an offering of well-being, there shall be offered a meal offering along with the animal, 3/10 of a measure of choice flour with half of a hin of oil mixed in. And as a libation, you shall offer half a hin of wine, those being offerings by fire of pleasing odor to the Eternal.
Okay, fascinating.
I could go into a buffet.
You don't have to be so frum that you pretend that this is interesting. Okay, so it is fascinating, but only if you understand what's going on here. I can't say that I would ever understand what's going on here, but I learned this from a guy named Ari Khan, who I mentioned last week as well, who I learned a lot of stuff from, but he learned it from the Sforno. And the Sforno was a 16th century rabbi who lived in Venice and lived in a, if you know anything about Jewish history, to be in the 1500s in Italy as a Jew is no picnic. It's the advent of the ghettoization of the Jews and a very, very heavy persecution, but to the point where it wasn't like persecution in Eastern Europe, like where it was, there it was more like sport. There it was more like, what do we have to do on Saturday night? Let's go slaughter the Jews. It was more theological. Living in the shadow of the Vatican, it was this massive effort at all times to convert the Jews to become Christian. And Sforno is writing in that time when there's, really great pressure on the Jews to convert. Because if you want to get out of the ghetto, all you have to do is convert. Then you can be a first-class citizen. And so, most Jews didn't do that back then, but you could. And so he had to explain to the Jews why you shouldn't do that. Okay, so it's fun when you read the commentators to understand the milieu in which they live, because then it informs when and what they're saying. But so given that perspective, if you look now, chapter 15, verse 3, look what Rabbi Ovadia Sforno, look what he says here. So, by the way, what did we just read? If I asked you to go back now and say, what did Norman just read? You'd probably say, I have no idea. It was something about sacrifices. But if you looked really closely, there was something different about how we talked about sacrifices here than we had earlier in the Torah. And what was the difference? Adding wine. When we offer sacrifices, we don't just offer the sacrifice like we did in other places. Now you've got to pour wine on top of it. What you call libation. Okay, now Sforno's going to say, wait a minute. What just happened there with the wine? Okay, so look what he says.
Until the advent of the sin of the golden calf, the expression ruach
okay, reach nichoach.
Reach
So let me just explain that phrase.
Reach.
Sometimes the Torah says reach nichoach. Reach is a smell. It comes from the same word as ruach. Ruach is a spirit. The only sense that your soul has is smell. I think we covered this once. Did I ever tell you that? The only sense that your soul actually has, because the soul is not body, but it can smell. Because what soul is, we go back to Genesis, is God breathing into you. It actually is breath. How do you say soul in Hebrew? Neshama. How do you say breathing? Neshima. Neshama, soul, neshima, breathing. It's the same word. So, and the Zohar talks a lot about this, the idea that the soul has a sense of smell, which is why we do the smelling on Havdalah. The Havdalah, the one last whiff of Shabbat is for the soul. That's why we have that. Okay. So the idea of making the sacrifice when you burn the animal or you burn the agriculture and it goes up to heaven, the idea of putting wine and frankincense are to create something that the Torah calls reach nichoach, which means a pleasing odor. You've probably heard that term before in the Torah, a pleasing odor. So here it says, well, wait a minute. There was no pleasing odor whenever we offered a sacrifice in the Torah until we got to the golden calf. Now that was the last big sin, but in this Torah portion we just read about the next big sin. So what is it with the sins and making, after you do a sin, making your sacrifices smell a little bit better? You see the connection? Okay, we haven't figured out the connection. We're just pointing out that there is one. Okay, so now let's see what this Forno says.
Okay. Until the advent of the sin of the golden calf, the expression reach nichoach had not surfaced as the libations plus gift offerings had been added in order to make the offerings truly pleasing to the eyes of the Lord. This is why we do not find such an expression in connection with the offering of Hevel.
Hevel is Abel, Cain's brother.
Right, in Genesis, Noah in Genesis, and of Abraham in Genesis. Neither do we find it in Exodus, where the burnt offerings and meal offerings offered by the firstborns before they had been exchanged for the tribe of Levi.
Right, so what the Sforno did is he said, he went back and he looked at all the other sacrifices. He said, there's no wine there. Why do we need wine here? Okay.
As for the sin of the golden calf, gift offerings and libations were required to make public offerings pleasing to the Lord. After the sin of the spies, even offerings by private individuals had to be accompanied by such libations and gift offerings, mincha and nesuchim, in order to qualify for the expression as proving that the offering had pleased the Lord.
Get some napkins. Okay. When we said you needed to pour,
I was ahead of you.
yeah, it was, yeah. We don't do that mitzvah anymore. Yeah, it got too messy.
I was on cue.
That was amazing. That was amazing. All right. Okay, so what we've pointed out so far. Yeah, Harvey? A burnt offering and what? And a meat offering. Well, there are lots of different types of offerings. A burnt offering is called an olah in the Torah. And that means that the entire animal has to be burnt for whatever reason you're offering it. And there's nothing left to eat of it. That the entire animal is consumed in the fire. It's not actually called a meat offering, but what you would call like a shlamim or some of the other offerings. The meat is left over, like on a korban Pesach, for example. You need the meat to eat in order to perform the mitzvah. So unless it's an olah, which is usually because it's atoning for something and the whole animal needs to be offered. In other cases where you're bringing a sacrifice for the purpose of a holiday or because you're celebrating or something, then you get to eat the meat. And they give you the meat after to take with you. So it's really, olah, the idea is that olah means like aliyah, to go up, that the entire thing is consumed in the fire to raise to heaven. Okay, good question. So we pointed out that two things changed. After the experience of the golden calf, whenever a communal offering was offered, you had to offer wine. A communal offering would mean like the Yom Kippur offering, or the Shabbat offering, or the daily offering that they did every morning, after morning, afternoon, and evening. That would be something, the Rosh Chodesh offering, that they did on behalf of the whole community. And those offerings that were done on behalf of the whole community after the golden calf needed wine. But now we're saying, after the sin of the spies, it got personal. And if you brought even your own offering, say your daughter's getting married, you wanted to bring an offering, or it's your own sin offering, or whatever, something personal that you want to bring on your own, now you have to bring wine for that too. Okay. In other words, we didn't have that wine before, but now we do. And so we could ask the question, is it a coincidence that we learn about wine and sacrifices right after the golden calf and right after the sin of the spies? Or is it just a coincidence that these are some new rules that we needed to learn at this time? And the Sforno says, something's going on here. Why is it that every time we have one of these enormous sins, now we have to add wine to the mix?
Well, the question I have is, what, you're giving a sacrifice, so it would be wine or meat, or what does sacrifice and wine mean?
What do you mean?
Well, why,
Like, what would be the point?
like, why not, why do you need a libation to add to the meat? The sacrifice is a sacrifice.
Okay, so that's what we're getting to. We're gonna build towards that answer. That is the question. But the one thing what do we pick up from the Sforno? From the Sforno, we pick up a partial answer to your question. I want to build to a more substantial answer, but a partial answer is, like when you're rude to someone and you want to be forgiven, so you start being nicer. So you have this big sin, and now you say, yeah, we're going to offer the sacrifice, but not only that, we're going to make it smell good. So something about the pleasing odor means like the Jews are trying to make up for something.
It's
Okay.
acknowledging their guilt.
Yeah, of course. Which is the whole point of the sacrifice in the first place, but they're trying to do it even nicer maybe, with the pleasing odor. But that's not a substantial enough answer. We're going to get to a much better answer. That's like an answer you'd get in Fort Myers. Like when I was younger and I didn't really go to the next level. Yeah. Still would have been better than Naples. Chas v'shalom, you study Torah in Naples.
Okay, there we go. When did they transition over from sacrifices to prayer?
When the temple was destroyed.
Second temple?
Second temple. That was the topic of my thesis, actually, if you want to read it. You can learn all about
Could
it.
you give us the Cliff Notes?
Well, when the second temple was destroyed, you weren't allowed, you can't offer sacrifices unless there's a holy temple. And so because the third temple won't be brought until the advent of the Messianic era, we're not allowed to do sacrifices anymore. And the rabbis had a choice of what to replace sacrifice with. And they had three choices. And the choices were Torah study, prayer, and acts of random kindness, what we call gemilut chasadim. And they picked prayer because it was the one thing that the community could do together. You still have to study Torah and do gemilut chasadim, but the one that was used for the purpose of replacing sacrifices was prayer because they wanted it to be communal. And that's why they picked that. So,
Also, politically, the Kohanim had control over the prayer process.
No, they didn't. They lost their power. When the temple was destroyed, they were mainly a class of people known as the Sadducees. And they went out of business. They lost their power, and the prayer went to the rabbis, who were not necessarily priests. Okay, let's move on because we have a lot left to get to. Stuart, did you have a question or comment?
I can we went back on it.
Yes.
So there has to be a significance to wine. What is the historic significance of wine?
Okay, don't. We're going to get there. You're on the right track. But before I answer that, and because I have 28 minutes, I want to look at one more section. And then we're going to get to the answer of what's so special about wine. Because if you don't ask the question, what's so special about wine, how do you figure any of this out? We're going to get there. Okay, so now we're up to, where did we leave off in the text? 11. Okay, again, verse 11, please.
I just want to say that my adult name mitzvah Torah portion was this one. Just like you.
Oh, you're in excellent company.
I'm like,
You're-
Thus shall be done with each ox, with each ram, and with any sheep or goat. As many as you offer, you shall do thus with each one, as many as there are. Every citizen, when presenting an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord, shall do so with them. And when throughout the ages a stranger who has taken up residence with you, or one who lives among you, will present an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord, as you do, so shall it be done by the rest of the congregation. There shall be one law for you and for the resident stranger. It shall be a law for all time throughout the ages. You and the stranger shall be alike before the Lord. The same ritual and the same rule shall apply to you and to the stranger who resides among you. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, You shall set some aside as a gift to the Lord. As the first yield of your baking, you shall set aside a loaf as a gift. You shall set aside as a gift, like the gift from the threshing flour. You shall make a gift to the Lord from the first yield of your baking throughout the ages.
Right, and you know what we call that today? Challah. That's challah. When you're making challah, you separate a piece. That's this. This is the mitzvah of challah. Okay. Okay, so let's keep going. A little bit more. Verse 21.
If you unwittingly fail to observe any one of the commandments which the Lord has declared to Moses, anything that the Lord has enjoined upon you through Moses, from the day that the Lord gave the commandments and on through the ages, if this was done unwittingly through the inadvertence of the community, the whole community shall present one bull of the herd as a burnt offering of pleasing odor to the Lord with its proper meal offering, and one he-goat as a sin offering.
Okay, so we saw before that was added that with your offerings now you have to offer wine, but now we see you also have to offer bread, a meal offering that goes along with it that we never had before. So not only are we saying you have to bring wine, but you also have to bring bread. Now I want to show you something really interesting that the Sforno says. So if you look, this is a sort of just derech agav, like by the way, not exactly what we're talking about, but just fascinating. What the Sforno says in Numbers 15:22 at the bottom of the page. Annabelle, would you mind reading it where it says, this verse has already been?
This verse has already been explained by Sifri
Right, Sifri is a midrash on this section of Torah.
as speaking of inadvertent commission of the sin of idolatry. Seeing that eventual exile had already been decreed for the descendants of this generation, it would be practically impossible for the exiled Jews not to become guilty of such acts in their host countries from time to time, even if they did not intend thereby to violate Torah laws.
Right, so Sforno's talking to a group of Jews who are ghettoized in Venice and who look around and see the Vatican and see all the pressure and see all the Christians doing so great around them while they have these horrific living conditions, and when they leave the ghetto they have to wear a hat or a star or something, and they're persecuted everywhere they go and everyone hates them, and they could very easily just convert. And Sforno warns them that the Torah says you're going to be tempted to do that. You're going to be tempted to convert. So look what he says here.
They would become guilty of such acts even after their return to their homeland, having acquired idolatrous habits while under duress in exile.
Right, so what are you going to do? You're going to go convert, and then when God brings us all back to Israel, you're going to walk to your home in Jerusalem with your cross and your, eating your wafers and,
Amongst
We're going back. This is a very unpleasant stop. But we're going back to Israel, and if you start taking all the habits of the other people, you're going to ruin it for everybody. So don't be tempted. And then he says, then he really lets them have it here at the end. Okay?
Our sages in Sifrei 111 have stated flatly that anyone acknowledging that any idolatrous cult is of substance, is useful, is considered as having denied the validity of the entire Torah.
Right. So if you say, well, I'm going to convert to Christianity, but not really. I'm just going to pretend, and I'm going to go to church once in a while. And so Sforno says, then you've denied the whole Torah. Don't do that. Elena?
Yes, if you go back to page 11, 20, 9, 18, and 17, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelites, people, and say to them, when you enter the land which I am taking you, but he's not taking them. You said after he spies, they're not going. So why does it say I'm taking them?
Their children, the next generation.
So he's speaking to their children. Or he's speaking to all of them
He's speaking to all Jews for all time, ever. Yeah.
in the future.
But there's something to it in which God says, it's true you're not going, but don't be disheartened because your kids will get to go. Well, that's the point of that. That's the point of that idea, is that it's true you're not going. You blew it multiple times. But I still have the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, that your people will go, and you will go. Your children will inherit the land, but you won't. Bobby?
I have an empathy for the Israelites at this juncture. First of all,
Okay.
they know slavery. They
Yeah.
don't know the land. They probably don't even know where it is. So their faith is in Moses
Okay.
and hopes that Moses will take them to a better place than Egypt. But I don't know that it had the significance that the Torah gives it and the impression that the Israelites have got after the spies return. I just think, and I understand why God looks at these people and says they're not ready to come to the land. They're still, all they are wandering slaves. They don't have a commitment to Judaism.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason. And what the spies saw only gives fodder to what Joshua says.
Yeah. I was watching this. Documentary. I'm trying to get it. A friend of mine made it. Rabbi Judy Schindler. She was my senior rabbi when I was in North Carolina. Daughter of Alexander Schindler, if you know who that was, former president of the Reform movement when it was called the UAHC. So now her life's work now is working between the black and Jewish communities. and I'm working with her on a summit that we're putting together for black pastors and rabbis in Atlanta at the end of August, which is going to be incredible. But so she made this documentary that shows the history of blacks and Jews in the civil rights era, and then how that relationship sort of broke in the 80s and 90s and so forth, and how we're trying to put it back together. And they're talking about these rabbis and black pastors who worked together and marched with Dr. King and Dr. Heschel and all. Although most of the black pastors call him Dr. Herschel. They think it's Herschel Walker or something, but if you watch the movie, they keep calling him Herschel. It's Heschel. All right. So one of them says, they show a picture, like images of the Holocaust and then images of slavery in America. And one of the pastors says, what Jews have in common with blacks is that you can leave slavery, but slavery doesn't leave you. You have that experience stays part of your DNA. The Holocaust will always be part of our DNA. You can't get it's always. And slavery, for the African Americans, will always be part of their DNA, and you can get away from it, but it doesn't get out of you. And so here you have these people who all they've known, like Bobby says, is slavery. All they've known is being whipped and beaten and told what to do, and not an ounce of freedom. And now they have a little freedom; they're not sure what to do with it. And who wouldn't be scared of going to another place where they also have people with whips and armies and stuff, and it could be just as bad there. It could be worse. So we should have empathy for where they are. And that's why God ultimately says, yeah, I thought you guys could go, but now I realize that the people who are going to inherit the land have to be born free. Because born into slavery, it won't work. And it didn't work, which is like an interesting idea. Now, we've added a layer here beyond the wine of the bread. And so we asked before, what's the significance of the wine? But what a better question then would be is, what do bread and wine have in common? And if you can figure out what bread and wine have in common, you can understand why this didn't work and what the problem was. Now, before we do that, though, before we try to figure that out, what did we say? I don't think we need the... Okay, so if you look on the back of the sheet, I just want to show you one section from Talmud. This is a super famous section. Let's see. Joe, would you mind reading it? This is from Shabbat 31a.
The Gemara continues discussing the conduct of the sages, citing the Reish Lakish said, "What is the meaning of that which is written, and faith of your time shall be a strength of salvation, wisdom, and knowledge. The fear of the Lord is his treasure." Okay, so there's this verse in Isaiah, happens to be 33:6, and Reish Lakish, one of the famous rabbis of the Gemara, asks this question and says, there's a lot going on in Isaiah 33:6, and it sounds familiar. Now, you know the song that we sing on Pesach, where we go, Echad ani yodeya, echad ani, echad Elokeinu shebashamayim uvarech, shnayim mi yodeya, right? Shnei luchot habrit, shlosha, what is shlosha? Oh, shlosha, so you've heard it. Okay. Shlosha ava arba imacha chamisha chumshei Torah shisha sidrei mishnah. So echad Elokeinu shebash. One, there's one God in heaven. Two, there's two luchot habrit. There are two tablets of the Ten Commandments. Three, there are three forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Four, there are four foremothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Five, there are 5 books of Torah. 6, shisha sidrei mishnah. There are 6 orders of Mishnah. The first part of the Talmud, the Mishnah, there's 6 orders of it. And so what are those 6 orders? Reish Lakish says they're hinted at in Isaiah 33:6. So look what it says now, Joe. Faith that is the order of the Zarim seeds in the Mishnah, because a person has faith in God and plants his seeds, your times.
Okay,
that-
so we don't need to go through all of them, but that's the only one that I was interested in, is Zra'im. Zra'im in Hebrew means seeds. And what it says here is, in the Mishnah, that the beginning of Isaiah is, and the faith of your times. So Reish Lakish says faith. Which one of the orders of Mishnah talks about faith? And then he said it's seeds, the one that has to do with agriculture. Why? Because they didn't really understand science that well. They thought that if you planted something and then you wanted it to grow, you needed the right amount of rain, and you needed everything. You needed the wind, and who controls all of that? God. So if you want your food to grow, you have to have faith, because that's the only way the food's going to grow. And if you don't have faith, you're not going to eat. Right? Clear so far? Okay. Now, what's the blessing? I'm going to ask a couple easy questions. First, a hard question. Do you know that there are different blessings for different types of food? The average Reformed Jew, I don't mean the Reformed Jew that takes this class. The average Reformed Jew thinks that anything that goes into your body, you say the motzi. Right? I can't tell you how many meals I've been to where we say, okay, let's sing the motzi. There's no bread on the table. Why would we sing the motzi? For sushi. Or whatever, whatever it is. So what would be a blessing? Does anyone know what the blessing would be called that you would say over a pastry or a donut? Mizonot. Borei mine mizonot. Okay. What would be the blessing you'd say for a vegetable that grows out of the ground? Borei peri ha'adama. Blessed are the fruits of adama, the ground or the soil. But for bread, which the wheat comes from the soil, we don't say Borei peri adama. We have a different blessing. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the land. Why don't we say Hamotzi, malafafon min haaretz, who brings forth cucumbers from the land? Everything else that comes from the land is Borei pri ha'adama, except bread. Bread has its own blessing. Now, wine. What blessing do I say over an apple? Borei pri ha'etz. Blessed is the fruit of the tree. And that's for every fruit except the grape or the wine. For the grape or the wine, I say, Borei peri hagafen. So do you just see here that wine and bread are treated differently than all other things that come off the tree or out of the ground? There's something different about bread and wine as compared to all other things that come from the ground or the tree. Clear so far? Okay. Now, what's the difference? The difference is, in order to make wine, you can't just pull the grape off of the tree. In order to have bread, you can't just take the wheat out of the ground. You got to work at it. You got to mix it with the dough. You got to do the whole fermentation process. But you can just take an apple or a cucumber and eat it. I mean, you wash it, whatever. But everything else is ready-made. But there's something different about the wine and the bread in that they require two things. The apple and the cucumber are given to you for free. God just gives it to you. Here, take it, go eat it. You don't have to do anything to it. But the bread and the wine require you to do the work. You see the difference? Okay. So, why then might we say, well, if we go back now to, let me see, one more sforno. So I just want to read verse 20. If we go back to the Torah, verse 20. Shelley, do you have it? Or Bill or someone? Verse 20. So let's read the verse and then read the sforno on it. Whoever has a mic.
As when you enter the land to which I am taking you, and you eat of the bread of the land, you shall set aside as a gift to the Lord as the first yield of your baking. You shall set aside a loaf as a gift. You shall set it aside as a gift like the gift from the threshing floor. You shall make a gift to the Lord from the first yield of your baking throughout the ages.
Okay, and now the sforno on verse 20, the one in the middle of the page, where it says after the sin.
After the sin of the spies, also the tithe heaving, known as challah, became a necessity in order for the individual homes of the Israelites to enjoy God's blessing. The prophet Ezekiel spells this out when speaking about the temple, etc. In the future, when he writes, "You are to give from your kneading bowl to the priest so that a blessing will rest on your house." This practice had already been displayed when Elijah, assisting the impoverished widow, commanded her to first give to him a small cake of the little flour she had left, as God had said that in such a case the jar of flour in her house would not become empty during the remainder of the famine.
Okay, so what we're seeing here is we had the sin of the spies, and they had to go to the land and go to war. And they had to fight their enemies. And they felt that that was something they couldn't do. And so they said, the land looks great. The spies came back and said, this is great. But the people there are too big, we can't do it. Now Caleb and Joshua also saw how big the people were and probably also maybe were afraid. But they didn't come back and say, we can't do it because we won't be able to defeat the people who are living there. There was something that they understood that the rest of the spies didn't understand. And that is that in order to defeat the people who lived there, they needed God to help them. But that was something that could happen. And ultimately, what does happen, you know the story that Joshua surrounds Jericho. He starts blowing the shofar. They had to believe that they could go in and win the battle. But once they went in to go and win the battle and they believed it, God fought the battle for them. All they had to do was blow the shofar, walk around the walls, and the walls came tumbling down. And then it was easy to defeat them. So what was the problem with the people who believed the spies, the 10 spies who brought the evil report, was they didn't understand. They didn't believe that you could partner with God. They didn't get that. They didn't understand that the purpose of being Jewish and the whole Torah is to partner with God. So what does God say? I want you to add 2 things to your sacrifices. 2 things that I'll give you part of it, and then you'll perfect it. I'll give you the wheat, but you'll turn it into bread. I'll give you the grapes, but you'll turn it into wine. And that will remind you that we need to work together. And until we get to that point where we work together, you're never going to be able to go to Israel. You see that? Rich?
It's just a repetitive kind of thing. I mean, with the Mishkan, we needed to buy in. We needed to contribute to it. We needed to participate in it. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of other situations in which that was really the concept.
Yeah.
We needed buy-in.
Yeah.
And that's really what this is. It's an effort. You have to put out the effort.
Right.
And that's your buy-in.
And the proof there with the Mishkan is that if you built it according to the standards that the Torah tells you, with all the cubits and stuff, it wouldn't fit. But God made it fit. Because it didn't work. And a miracle happened. There were a number of miracles that go along with the Mikdash that made it work because they worked together. And so the idea is that when Jews and God work together, you can do the impossible. Or the impossible becomes possible. So, Richard? You're right. Yafeh. Very nice. Okay, so now we look at this. Ironically, when the spies come back, they're carrying with them clusters of grapes. I mean, we skipped that part. But if we go back in the Torah portion and you ask, well, where the grapes come from? So the spies brought grapes, and the people said, we can't turn that into wine. They're too big. It's too much. We can't figure it out. So they said, okay, well, you're going to offer sacrifices then for 40 years in the wilderness, and you'll learn that the whole part of this is to take what God's giving you and make it yours. And you never did it. That's what's so beautiful about Zionism. And this is what Rav Kook understood. The first chief rabbi of Israel, who was the first ultra-Orthodox rabbi to really buy into the Zionist idea, is they said, you have this land that's a total mess. But if you come and clean it up and drain the swamps, you can turn it into the Holy Land again. And that's what happened. But the idea, I think, is if you're just relying on God, I think we said this last time, in Somchim al Nisim, we don't rely on miracles. If you're just relying on God to do everything for you, then nothing's going to happen. But if you're willing to work with God, then you can take it. So the whole point of this story, and the whole reason that the end of the Torah portion is having to do with adding wine and bread to the sacrifices, is because the sin of the spies happened for the reason that we didn't understand how to work with God. And now that we understand how to work with God through bread and wine and adding that to our sacrifices, we understand where the spies went wrong and how to fix the problem. And I never really necessarily understood that that's what caused the spies to trip up so greatly until I figured this out.
Did the Knicks partner with God during Game 4?
Look, I have a problem with the Knicks. Because when I don't care who's, I'm a Sixers fan. They're never going to be in the finals. But, so I root for the team that has either more Jews in the city, or like I Googled last night, who was it? Oh yeah, Brunson's wife is Jewish. Who was it? I forget. Bosnia Herzegovina was playing Canada, right? So I'm trying to figure out which country's more anti-Semitic, and who to root for. And it was really a push. It was really, but ultimately I was pulling for Bosnia-Herzegovina because the Serbs and the Croats there, as opposed to the Bosniaks, who are pro-Palestinian, and Canada's been horrible. But with the Knicks, you have a problem because I didn't want the people who voted for Mamdani to win. But there are also 1 million Jews there who are thrilled about the Knicks. So it's a machloket. It's a real Talmudic debate on that one.
To get back to the Torah study.
Oh yeah, sure.
If you don't mind. It occurs to me throughout this that God must have been really furious at the spies, because now the Jewish people have to make up for, in a big way. I mean, they have offended God, and we don't know what God said to Moses, but we know what Moses said to the people.
Right.
And Moses recognized that God was furious that the people were rejecting the land that he was trying to give them.
Yeah. So look, obviously God doesn't have human emotions, so we can't say. But we're limited to human understanding, so we put God in, how he would react. But I think you have to say, it's good that this happened, because I need to teach you now about what partnership is. And okay, so you messed up, that's your generation, but this is for all of history, and Jews need to know, by the way, every time you make Kiddush, and every time you do Challah, you should be thinking about, I'm partnering with God to try to perfect the world. We never attain perfection of the world, but we're trying. Joe?
Could you please make a quick announcement about tomorrow's Christ the King Church?
Oh, yeah. So anyway, that's the big finish. That's it. Work with God. But let me tell you something. you could have read that section in a lot of other shuls and maybe not come up with something that interesting. So tomorrow I'll be speaking at Christ Journey Church at 3:30. If you want to come, they're doing an Ask the Rabbi session. They're one of the churches that's really interested in partnering. They're a large church, very influential church in Coral Gables, and they're interested in working with us and Unbiased and to partner against in the fight against anti-Semitism. Yeah, Anastasia, somewhere in the Gables. By the Biltmore. Anyway, it's at 3:30. They're doing an Ask the Rabbi session. I'll be answering their questions. I know that some of them are going to be about anti-Semitism, they told me, but we'll find out what the story is.
What's the name of the church?
Christ Journey.
It's also the congregation, 624 Anastasia.
What's it?
24 Anastasia.
Yeah, it's called, yeah, that's right. Christ Journey Church, 624 Anastasia Avenue, Coral Gables. What time? 3:30. 3:30. So if you want to come for that. Otherwise, thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Have a great day. put a mic on this. Can we do that? Yeah, no. I want to put a mic on. You have extra mics, right? Okay, so 1, 2, 3. With a stand, just do this. Whoop, whoop. Can we try it? Just try it one time. Instead of the plug-in plug thing. If you wanted water.
Check, check. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Check. Pablo, check. Pablo, check. Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Pablo, tráeme otro micrófono. Con batería. Check, check.